Our project today is about over-reliance on technology during flight training. This project is by Christian Floor and Hudson McNellis. We wanted to explore how flight training was different at flight schools and how it differed from our own experiences. We wanted to see how these different training environments affected future pilots and if glass cockpits increased or decreased safety. We did a small, non-scientific study to find out a few things for ourselves. Hudson got his private pilot license Part 61 in a six-pack aircraft. He then went to a 141 school for instrument through multi-commercial. He started his flight training as a technology skeptic and always assumed that there was a failure because that's what he was taught and experienced in the 50-year-old aircraft. At the 141 school, he learned to rely more on the Magenta line because failures didn't happen as much, and the instructors had the same experience throughout their entire flight training. I did my private pilot's license Part 61 on a G1000 equipped Cessna. I then came to ERAU for the Part 141 course from instrument through CFII. My private instructor was very much of the old way of flying, paper charts, mechanical E6B, etc., to the point that I was unaware that our aircraft had a GPS until I attended ERAU. Our purpose today is not to discredit technology, but only to make pilots aware of some of their possible weak points and how to train for them. Aviation has never been safer, and a large part of this is due to advances in technology. The issue that we are covering today is more in flight training. We see a lack of experience in older aircraft may cause some problems early on in the career as pilots try to transition to jobs at places like Cape Air. Modern flight training may also result in a lack of knowledge regarding more primitive forms of navigation. Captain Warren Vanderberg gave his legendary Children of the Magenta speech in 1997, well before the glass cockpits of today had entered into flight training. He described in his speech 3 levels of automation: manual flight, using the autopilot with heading, flight level change, vertical speed, and altitude modes, and using the autopilot with data fed through the FMC. Our Cessna has the same 3 levels, with the 3rd level being the nav, VNAV, and approach modes.
Possibly bring to me that I don't already have. But you see, we have become what I call children of the magenta. You know, we think we have to have those magenta lines on the map and that magenta V-bar that's...
The basic concept of his speech is to step back from the technology and revert to your roots. If something technical fails or doesn't do what it's supposed to, step down a level.
Around 20,000 feet or so, the controller calls you up and says, American Umpty-Ump, change your arrival. I want you to turn left now, head so-and-so, descend to maintain such-and-such an altitude, intercept the so-and-so radial of the such-and-such VOR for the arrival to Umpty-Ump runway. At this point, is it time to go? Or is it time to drop down a level? It's time to drop down.
And so, we decided that we needed to see for ourselves if this was true. A quick disclaimer before we begin. The results and data you are about to see are entirely unscientific and do not meet the rigorous standards required for true research. The survey was simply done in our free time with willing participants for their entertainment only. No identifying information is associated with any of the results. This information is in no way associated with any particular flight school or flight instruction curriculum. The route we selected for our students took them across the state of Iowa. They were given direct routing between the 2 airports with 2 VORs along the way that they could use as backup navigation. We divided them into 2 groups, with one group being made aware of the VORs ahead of time and one group not being aware of the VORs ahead of time. Along the route, we gave the students a GPS failure and told them to do their best to navigate to the desired destination airport and verify it using cross radials. We found that those who planned with the backup sources of navigation were able to find their intended airport the first try around 80% of the time, and around 70% of the time they were able to identify the exact location of the destination airport using a cross radial. Those who did not plan the backup nav source were only able to find the intended airport 50% of the time, and were only actually able to identify it with a cross radial 30% of the time. Those who had prior experience with 6-pack 8 instruments were much more likely to plan for the VOR. Obviously, those who were preached to about the redundancy planned their flight with the 2 VORs, and they ended up with a better success rate. From this, we hypothesized that giving students more experience in less technically advanced aircraft could be beneficial to their skills long term. We think that introducing students to more primitive aircraft at some point during their flight training may be more beneficial to them and their instructors. Instead of feeding a reliance on the G1000 and the GPS, we can throw students into the wolf pit of ground-based navigation and teach them the intricacies of VORs, NDBs, and other forms of navigation. In conclusion, we believe that some students today are becoming too comfortable with relying entirely on the GPS. In today's job climate, a lot of us are going to have to fly primitive aircraft after our graduation. The learning curve for flight students in breaking into the professional field will happen during their career instead of during the more forgiving environment of flight training. For example, Hudson's first job started off terribly because he could not figure out the avionics situation at his certain flight school while also trying to teach a student how to use it. He feels that he ended up cheating the student out of their money because he was not fully knowledgeable in the avionics available.